Welcome to the History of Nerds United podcast. I'm your head nerd, Brendan. Thank you so much for being here. A special one for me today, Todd Doughty. He's an author, so we're going to do that. Normal thing, but also Todd is a bigwig at Doubleday Books, one of the huge publishers. We talk about how publishers can get pretty confusing. We dive into that. But this one's special for me because when History of Nerds was first starting out, I reached out to a bunch of publishers, seeing who might actually respond, thinking none of them would. Todd was one of the first that did. Through him, I ended up interviewing David Grann, other authors that I had no hope in my mind that I would ever interview, and I did. Todd was friendly and helpful and professional from day one, really helped kind of boost what we're doing here at History Nerds United. And it's just because he's a great guy who does his thing and pays everything forward, and his book is also a lot about that. We're going to talk about it. I was so excited to talk to Todd, to actually get him on this podcast. We did it. It came out as great as I hoped it would be. I think it's going to leave you with a smile on your face. That's what I'm going to tell you right now. So how about I shut up? Let's bring on Todd. And here we are with author Todd Doughty. Little Pieces of Hope, Happy Making Things in a Difficult World. But I'm cutting you short here, Todd. First of all, thanks for coming on, but that's probably not your full title now, is it?
Well, thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here and was honored that you asked me to join. My full title is SVP, Deputy Publisher, Publicity and Communications at the Knopf Doubleday Publishing Group. But I tend to tell folks, you can just call me a publicist. Like, I work with books and authors, and I've been here at Penguin Random House now for 26 years, which seems remarkable. So basically what a publicist does, for folks who may not know, is in book publishing, if you go to an author event at your favorite bookstore, or they hear an author talking on your podcast, or see an author on a TV show, or read about them in the newspaper or online, or wherever they consume their news, a publicist is responsible for pitching that author in their book to get media coverage for it. That's the easiest way I can explain it.
It's the easiest way, but I have to say, and this is for me, I know other people may not worry about this, figuring out imprints might be the hardest thing about being a podcaster, because I look at a book and I'm like, oh, cool, Doubleday. Why is there a penguin on there? Wait a second. But then is it Knopf? How do you even say that? And there is just...
You did it correctly. You did it correctly.
So it's really strange, because when you say an imprint, it means the book is part of an organization that falls under another organization. So like you just said, Penguin's up top, and I think, are they the biggest bookseller in the world, or like two, or I don't even know.
Penguin Random House is our parent company here in the U.S., and within the company, there are individual imprints. So I looked this up today, actually. The definition of an imprint is basically a trade or brand name that identifies a publisher, what they publish, their list, and things like that. That's the official definition of it. You can look at different imprints across the industry. Tor does a lot of science fiction. A trade publisher normally does fiction and nonfiction. There are genre publishers out there for different types of fantasy, sci-fi, romance, anything under the sun. You know, here at Doubleday is over 125 years old. Knopf is over 100 years old. Vintage, our venerated paperback line, has been around for decades. But it is that kind of branding name, and it identifies your list. Does that make sense?
It does. I mean, sort of. I'm going to forget that. I'm going to have to go back and listen to the podcast again.
Okay.
But I think the big thing to take from that is I'm just going to call you King Doubleday. It's easier to do that for the rest of the podcast. I know.
No need.
But one of the things is, and I talk about this when I did my review of the book, and I think it's really important to say right now, when I was starting out as a podcaster, I just shamelessly started emailing authors. And you were the first, like, hey, that guy's got a long title after his name. And I remember I'm like, oh, I'm going to fire off this email and never hear a thing back. You were one of the first publicists to ever just respond and be like, hey, what are you trying to do? Let's do it. And I don't need to say it, but I think people don't realize this. Your imprint is known for having those huge books. We were just David Grann's The Wager, which was huge. Hampton Sides, his newest. Candace Millard, all those people. You're known for having these really huge books in an industry where, you know, it's fighting off this stuff. And I just want to say publicly, thank you for responding to some nerd who I think I had done 3 interviews at that point, and you just kept responding. So I don't know what's wrong with you, but I appreciate it.
Well, you're very kind. It was a pleasure to respond. And, I'm a fellow book nerd, so that was easy to do. I think that it also helps. I'm a zero inbox kind of guy, which
Me
is,
too, yeah.
I try to be. So if it's in there, I got to deal with it. I've been really, really lucky to work at Doubleday and now the entire Knopf Doubleday group. It encompasses our imprints of Knopf, Doubleday, Vintage, and Pantheon. But, I got my start in 1998 as a publicity assistant at Random House, which originally was at 201 East 50th Street. A lot of people know Random House from Bennett Cerf, one of the founders, and it was just the thrill of a lifetime because I grew up in a rural town in southern Illinois, about 6 hours south of Chicago, called Carterville. Go Lions. My family is all still there, and I came to New York City when I was 16 years old on a Methodist church youth trip, and I decided at that moment I was going to move there. I was like, I'm going to go move to New York. And I came home, told my mom, and she said, well, you're going to finish college and then you can do whatever you want. And I ended up doing that. I graduated on a Friday. My best friend and I packed up a U-Haul and we hit the road on Monday and we were in Manhattan on Tuesday. We didn't have an apartment for a couple of weeks, so we lived in a youth hostel on 46th Street. But here I was in the big city. I was a bookseller for a couple of years. And then a friend of mine that I worked with, Jerry Krasner, her friend Amy, was the managing editor at Random House. And that's the person who keeps all the publishing trains running on time for the production of books. And she said, there's this publicity job that's opening as an assistant, and I think you'd be really good at it. You can talk to a wall and you love to read. And I was like, okay. I had no clue what any of this meant. And I'd never worked in an office before. I was 25 years old, and somehow I tricked my then boss, Carol Schneider, into hiring me. And I remember on my first day, her assistant, Amanda, who was training me, said, if Dr. Maya Angelou or John Irving call, go get Carol out of whatever meeting she was in. And I believe they both called that first day, if my memory is right. If it wasn't, it was one day and the other the next. And, these are people that I had read and adored and loved. And it was just amazing to be in this world of publishing. And I can't say it enough. I've been really, really lucky to work with an amazing roster of authors, and to be at some place like our Knopf Doubleday group is really an honor. It's been just a great experience.
Your early 20s sound like the beginning of a rom-com. I think I've seen the actual movie.
Well, I did meet my husband when I was 23. So,
it was a rom-com.
We've been together 29 years, but no, New York was really fun for somebody, I'd only been here on that one trip, but I had read about New York in books. Seen New York in movies, and that was always the place for me. That was the dream.
A lot of people talk about, and I'd like to hear what you see from your side of things, that publishing specifically has had a really rough time the past 10, 15 years, that the revenues aren't there, people aren't buying books. Did COVID change a lot of that? Is it still really hard to put a book out there? I know from talking to some authors, they're like, hey, doing a pitch is more stressful than it used to be. What do you see from your side of things?
Well, the good thing is that there are reports that show that in 2024, the market itself for books was up 5%. Print books sales have increased in the past year. People are still reading. People are still voraciously reading, and I think that that's a very good sign. And it's an important thing to do in one's life. I mean, I was a book nerd as a kid. I come from a long line of readers. My grandfather was a coal miner who took a book into the mine every day to read on his lunch break. My mom is a big reader. My Uncle Dennis is a big reader. So that was kind of ingrained in me. There's always challenges in publishing, but I think that right now, it's a good sign that people are invested in reading, that are taking book bans seriously, that are putting out good books into the world. There are the challenges that everyone faces in publishing. You have a changing marketplace. basically trying to find new readers across the board. I think the good thing is that social media has helped in that respect. And then, you still can't underestimate the power of both a person-to-person recommendation of a book and also the booksellers that put books into people's hands, and librarians too. The Carterville Public Library was and remains a very special place for me. When I was a kid, I went down there almost every day in the summer for the summer reading programs, although I was always bested by Beth Rausenberger and Jennifer Flesner, and usually placed third.
Luckily, you're not still bitter about that.
Not at all. No, we were actually all three friends, but they were faster readers than I am. But to go back to kind of the childhood thing, reading was ingrained in me from a very, very young age. And, to have it give me my professional life is kind of just an amazing thing. Again, I know how lucky I am.
And that's all positive. And, just to get negative for a second,
Yeah.
Which author is the biggest jerk that you work with? I know you won't answer that. I'm kidding. We're going to keep it positive. I just wanted to see your face when I started that question, but we're good. Well,
Okay.
Speaking of positive, let's talk about Little Pieces of Hope. All right.
Sure.
This is your book, but started as an Instagram. Talk about, how did this start? How do you get to the Instagram? And then how do you say, oh, I'm going to put this in book form?
So this was really kind of a happy accident. On the train home on March 11th, 2020. I don't know where it came from. I remember looking out the train window. We live in Westchester. I take Metro North from Grand Central every day. It's about a 30-minute ride. And I decided to do a list of happy making things, right? This is the very beginning of the pandemic. Our offices were closing on March 13th. And the one thing that I will say before we kind of get into talking about the book more deeply is that this book sprung from a difficult time. And I think that's why it's relevant still now, 5 years later, right? Things were very, very scary. I think that was the same day that the WHO declared a global pandemic. Folks, it's not a pandemic book. That's what I'm trying to say, but things were changing very, very rapidly. And I wanted something grounding. So I just started making this list, and it was a list of happy making things. Like I said, it started off with New York City, fat goldfish, a really good burger, long walks, your foot sticking out from under a blanket in order to find some cool air, short naps, Sondheim, someone forgiving you, someone believing in you, a really bad DJ at a wedding turning into a really good DJ at a wedding. And I just kind of went on. So I posted it to my Instagram with the photo of New York City, and friends and family started responding. And I thought, well, I'm going to do this again. And I kept going, and I kept going, and I kept going and going, and more people responded. People were leaving some comments about their own happy making things. And a few months later, a friend of mine who is a literary agent, Brittany Bloom at the book group, she called and she said, you're writing a book. And I was like, no, I'm not. And she said, this is a book. And I was like, no, it's not. And she said, yes, it is. And so we came up with a proposal. I was smart to listen to her. We sent it out widely that summer. There were a lot of rejections, and then it found its home at Penguin Life thanks to my editor, Meg Leder. And by that point, I'd had months of these lists, right? And I thought oh, we're done. This is it. But this is where it got really interesting, because this was the other side of the publishing coin. To go back to publicity for a minute, my job is the caboose of the publishing train. The book is written, the jacket's been designed, the book has been edited, the flap copy is written, the author photo is done. All of these things that give you the finished product are in place. And in publicity, it's our job to get media for the authors and their books, this coverage. So I was actually starting at the very beginning when this all happened. And it was one of the most rewarding experiences of my professional life, because, again, I got to see this from the other point of view and got to experience a book being made. Meg's a brilliant editor. She looked at it and she's like, well, you're not quite done. We're going to need about 50% more content. And I think in order to give the reader a break, we need some essays. So there's 16 essays in the book. There's some playlists in the book. And that's really how how it began. My deadline was, I believe it was December 1st of 2020. I turned in the book early, but I kept going with the list. So I'd been doing this all along, right? Because I needed to have more stuff for the book for the reader. But it was really a joy to kind of go down this rabbit hole every day and think of happy making things. And we all have them. You have the movie that got you through the bad time, the song that got you through the breakup, the sports team that you're rooting for. You have the piece of art that inspires you. You know, again, I think that these touchstones in your life, be it memory or recipes or songs or films or mixtapes or things that got you through, you know, in a world that is very difficult to manage the changing, well, by the second, you know, having those things to ground you and to kind of get you through, we all do it, you know. And again, to go back to the Instagram post, like it was interesting to see like some folks didn't like things, but would offer their own suggestions. So what began to happen was there was a dialogue, and I hope that that still continues with the book.
Something that I've noticed, especially talking to brand new authors, people who've decided I'm writing this book, a lot of imposter syndrome, especially with your first book. I'd also have to think you being in the industry, you might have had even more anxiety around that. I would just think you would have to like, oh, you're handing this out and people know your name and they're like, Todd's been doing it, now he's trying to angle to put his own book out. Was that a thought kind of in your head that you had to fight against and be like, no, I'm doing something that's really worthwhile? Or are you kind of like, oh, everybody's just thinking I'm going to, you know, try and strong arm this thing through?
I think we all have moments of that anxiousness in whatever you're doing, right? Whether it's work, it's your personal life, it's your friendships, it's your relationships. You know, the thing about this that was really great, this literally came from nowhere. I don't know where this came from that day on March 11th. It was something that just literally popped into my head, like I said, as I was sitting on that train. I think for me, the way that I really look at this book is that it's a daily devotional of delight. And I know that sounds corny. I don't recommend reading this thing all the way through. Like, I actually think it's a pretty perfect bathroom book. Like, you can read a page at a time. You can treat it as a devotional, but I think that it's best digested in small amounts. You know, a lot of these lists, there's a lot of items in all of them. You know, it took me about an hour and a half to 2 hours to write these each day, and things would pop up from memory, or we'd be in the car and we'd hear a song on the radio and I would take a picture of it, or I just kind of go down a rabbit hole of things that either I remembered, or I'm also a pack rat. Like, I've saved out articles that I've ripped out of magazines over the years. Books, of course, as we were talking before we got on here, our apartment is covered in books. So these touchstones were all there for me. But again, kind of going in and building these list outs, and as the out was really the fun part. And as you read them, you'll see I kind of zig and zag from point to point. There are things that are related to each other. There are sentence structure that's related to each other. And my colleague, Sabrina Bowers, is the person who actually designed the text of the book. And it's beautifully, beautifully done. When we were talking about it, I said, I kind of want the reader to have an experience. The list itself is an experience. Maybe you've heard of something, maybe you haven't. Maybe you like something, maybe you don't. Maybe it triggers a memory. You know, again, it's that interactive part of this that is the most fun. And she really created that in all of the different fonts. Josie Portillo is the artist who did all the art throughout the book. She just does it beautifully. So it was a great experience to see it come together. But I think for the reader, like, you don't have to do this. You don't even have to read it straight through. You can just dive in and out. That's the best part.
Yeah, I mean, listen, let's dive into some specifics. Number one,
sure.
How is your obsession with Lin-Manuel Miranda going? Would you say it's getting more or less? Do we have to call somebody? Should we be worried?
No, you don't need to worry. I did see him on Broadway about a week ago. He was doing Simon Rich's play All In. It was him, Aidy Bryant, Nick Kroll, and Jimmy Fallon all reading Simon Rich's short stories about love on stage. It was 90 minutes of bliss. It was great. They just announced that there's going to be a sequel coming to Broadway called All Out, which is Simon Rich's stories about life. So the obsession is healthy and strong, but nobody needs to worry.
Okay. Lynn, you're safe if you're listening to this. You're definitely not.
I still haven't met him yet, though. We still have not met. So there's a bucket list item there.
You never know. Maybe this is how it happens.
Who knows?
Again, probably not, but we'll see. I have to say this. I don't want to get negative, but how
Sure.
do you have a list of best slow dance songs and you don't have Lady in Red on it? I understand you can't have everything on there, but I mean, you're going to have that type of list that is not on there?
Well, see, you've done the beautiful thing. You have looked at this thing and you're going, this is what's missing. So if what I have done for the reader is to spark something that they love that should be on that list, I say, get your pen out, write in the book itself, put your own thing in there, do your own lists. I think it's important that we recognize that no matter how hard the time is and whether the problem is big or small, one of the things that I say in the beginning of the book is that everybody is carrying an invisible bag of rocks. You don't know how heavy it is. You don't know. It could be heavier sometimes than others. And we've all experienced that. But there's going to be things on there that people don't like or that they do like. But I think, again, to have you begin to think about what you love and what's important to you and what makes you happy is a very good thing.
It feels like a trick, but I'll go along with it. I will say, though, I cannot abide by writing in a book. I just feel morally I can't allow it. Not if you're listening to this podcast, people. No writing in books.
Penguin hasn't asked yet, but I kept saying, I think there needs to be a journal for this, right? There could be prompts, 3 things, 5 things, your own list that you could do each day, even if it's a Post-it. I mean, I did all of this on my phone, right? It's all in my notes. That was how the whole book was written, with the exception of a couple of the essays. You can do that yourself. You don't even need paper. But I think it's okay to write in this book. I think it's okay.
I mean, you are the author, but still.
But you do you.
If you turn it into a workbook, then I'm okay. If I have the lines, then it's fine. Okay, we'll move on.
I'll talk to Meg about that.
Do you return to this book and do you say, hey, I need to make some updates, maybe adding History Nerds United to it? Or should we be waiting for the sequel, Little Pieces of Hope 2, more Hoper?
I would love to have more Hoper, but that hasn't happened as of yet. It's funny. The book will be 4 years old this year. So to think of it out in the world existing on its own is kind of remarkable. I was looking through it again today and there were things that I'd forgotten about. It feels like the only way that I can talk about it, or I can describe it, is a friend of mine asked me about this. And I said, it's like you have this toy in a box in your home. And the toy is in the box in a corner. But once a day, you get the box, you put it on the table, you open the lid, you take out the toy, you play with the toy for about an hour or so. Then you put the toy back in the box, you close the lid, you put it back in the corner. The toy has no relevance on any other part of your life than when you are playing with it or enjoying or imagining or creating or doing whatever you do. That's what it was like to write this book. And so now the toy is out in the world. I've heard from folks who have loved it. I've heard from folks who have said it made them, think about things in a different way or discover things. And there's nothing that can make me happier than that. But that's kind of the best way to describe it, if that makes sense. I feel like I'm word saladating.
No, because it is true. And I write about it in my review is first of all, and I know that for some people this is not cool, but for book nerds it is. It's earnest, right? And it's you're putting yourself out there by writing the stuff down there, and we are seeing inside kind of your head, and you're saying this for you too, right? And I write it about in the review. There was something about just a good plumber.
Yeah.
And for me, I stopped and thought about 3 weeks ago, there was a guy here. He came in here. He fixed this. Hey, I'll do this for free. Hey, listen, I don't have to do it like this. And I'm just like, I want it done right. And he leaves, you pay him, and you're like, it's a lot of money, but it's also, I don't have to worry about a leak, and we can't use this. And it changes your entire outlook when you work with somebody in any industry, and they walk out the door and you say, this person just did a great job. They're great at their job. That was 3 words in the book, and that just kind of keeps happening, making those synapses kind of fire. But also, it's the type of book, too, where you need to go into it open to allow it to get into you, not just sit there and say, of course, was my concern, oh, I told Todd I was going to read this. What happens if I hate it? And thank God I didn't. But it's also the type of book, like you said, you can jump in and jump out, but you got to go with the conceit, which is, hey, let it kind of wash over you. Let it make that connection, right?
Yeah, and I think that's a very good way to put it. I think that to take a few minutes of your day, whether it's looking at little pieces of hope or making your own lists or thinking about your own life, right? All of that joy and happiness is right there within reach, no matter what you are going through. It can be a regular old bad day. It can be something that's a life-changing event for you or someone you love. But that touchstone of seeing the world around you, being a part of the world around you, noticing the world around of you, it takes an active presence to do that. Like, look, I'm not a self-help guru. This is just my life experience. I mean, I think that it's earnest because there's a truth to being open to that joy that is a very important part of life. I really do think that. And as you age, you begin to feel that importance more than ever.
Well, I mean, speaking of old, there's one line that hit me like a ton of bricks because it's just perfect to me as an older person. I'm not going to say I'm old. I'm old. It's fine. But you have a line in there, stop saying yes when you mean no.
Yeah.
And I think when you're young, it's the opposite, right? Like say yes to stuff, do these things. But as I'm older, I find, I'm much happier when I look at something and I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that.
It's funny that you say that. I love that you registered that. For me, being a people pleaser, I think, all of us has done it at some point in their life. It's a very easy trap to fall into. A friend of mine told me when I entered my 40s that you were going to start saying no to things more easily. And then once I got to my 50s, that definitely is true. It can be, again, something simple, quite simple as a party you don't want to go to or a book that you throw out after 25 pages that you don't like. You do have that power. And I still remember that. And 40 was 12 years ago. My friend saying that to me, and it definitely came true for me.
And it's just an example of what's in the book for anybody who's still sitting there saying, I'm not quite sure what this is. It's a little bit of everything.
Yeah. A lot of the essays were really fun to write about. I mean, there's some things that were like The Big Move, Taking the Leap. There's one about Mrs. Bullard, the teacher that changed my life. There's one about the Carterville Public Library. There's one about one of my favorite paintings. The last essay is about my mom and her parents who died when she was very, very young, and sort of what the continuum of love has meant to her and to me. It's one of the through lines in the book. That essay was probably the hardest to write, but the one that was most meaningful. The book is dedicated to her and her parents and her grandmother, who all died on the same day. What I tried to do was hit these touchstones that relate to all of us, right? Like, again, the book has, memories or feelings or holidays or recipes and songs. And I tried to make it as relatable as I could to everyone, and again, like there may be some things in there that folks don't know, but hopefully that leads you on a chase to find out what that is.
Now, we've talked about this. We should also mention, are you keeping the Instagram going? Can people follow you? Can we get more?
Yeah, please follow. I'm at Todd Doughty on Instagram. I have not been doing the lists as much, but I will tell you this. I did keep going for a while. I had been resurrecting them in my stories and been adding to a few, but I went solid for, I believe, almost 2 full years. One of the things that I've done lately on New Year's Eve, I've been doing these lists, things I've learned or relearned this year, and that's been a lot of fun. And it's kind of interesting to take that beat to look over everything. I think that I turned the book in, like I said, in December of 2020, and then I kept going far beyond that. So there's still plenty of content there. And like I said, I've been resurrecting them too.
What's harder for you to believe right now, that you're King Doubleday or a published author?
Definitely published author is something I never thought would happen. King Doubleday, not technically in my title. I just feel very lucky to be here working with these authors. I'll give you a really good story, actually. So in college, my 2 college roommates, Jeremy and Casey, we all became obsessed with this new thriller writer. This guy came out with a book, huge bestseller that America became obsessed with, called The Firm. And his name was John Grisham.
Never heard of him. No one's ever heard of him. He disappeared right after that.
We all became obsessed with John and his books. We read The Firm, A Time to Kill, Pelican Brief, The Client. I read everything, and in college anyway, back in 1992, I actually wrote John a fan letter. And I still have it to this day. I still have the envelope, and he answered me, which was kind of amazing. And then in a weird full circle moment, Doubleday, of course, publishes John. And in 2014, I became his publicist. And that was a dream come true, to work with an author who, is one of the greatest storytellers and writers of our time, who also happens to be an exemplary human being, has just been the thrill of a lifetime. And again, that goes back to me saying how lucky I was. But that was a great full circle moment.
I tell people this whenever they ask about what this is like. And I said, I have not interviewed a jerk yet. And I've certainly, between publicists and the actual authors and everybody in between, listen, I'm sure there's always jerks in every industry, but I've also been so amazed how many people are willing to give you the time of day. And it seems like there's a lot of positives to the industry, even though it has, I'm sure, every industry has those challenges like you've talked about.
Well, the funny thing about this is it's one of the industries that still has people staying in one place for a long time. And I mean that in the best sense. As I said, I've been at Penguin Random House for 26 years. So one of the most wonderful parts of this job is not only working with authors over and over again, house authors. I'm working with John Grisham on book number 15 this year that we've done together. I've been with Candace Millard, who's written The River of Doubt, Destiny of the Republic, and 2 other works of nonfiction since her first book almost 20 years ago. I've worked with Hampton Sides on 5. David Grant I've been with since the beginning, since 2009's The Lost City of Z. So you get to have these wonderful relationships with these writers who are so talented and who, produce these remarkable works of art that are going to last. I mean, it's just kind of the best gig in the whole world. And then the other side of that is that you get to know all the booksellers, the media folks that we work with on a regular basis. And it's an experience to have all these relationships together. We're really lucky in that respect. Ann Patchett has become a true friend of mine. And, I fell in love with Bel Canto years ago. And to see what she has done for our books and authors and other books and authors is just absolutely amazing. I never thought something like that would ever happen in my life.
And I mean, you just dropped some amazing names that, of course, make my nerd brain go completely nuts.
Sorry, I didn't mean to name drop.
No, it's wonderful. It's just I blacked out for a second. I'm just trying to come back.
I'll give you a minute.
But now that you said those names, what should we be looking for? I mean, of course, sure. I'm a nonfiction person, but anything that's on your radar, it doesn't even have to be one of yours, but anything on the radar where you're like, you want people to know, hey, this is coming out. I already know it's amazing. Everybody should be looking for it.
If folks haven't read David Gran or Hampton Sides, you've actually interviewed both of them for the show. So they can find those podcasts to listen to. Hampton just released his nonfiction, The Wide, Wide Sea, a biography of Captain Cook's final fateful voyage, which is an absolutely amazing, rave reviews, sold tons of copies last year. David's The Wager has sold over 1 million copies in the US. The story 200 plus years ago of The Wager, the shipwreck, and what the crew did to survive is incredible. If you've never read Candace, my favorite book of hers, Candace Millard, is Destiny of the Republic, which is half a biography of James A. Garfield, and then the latter half is about his assassination, the attempts to save his life, and what happened in the aftermath. And I think that one of the things that's so cool about a lot of these nonfiction writers that I've mentioned is that they illuminate these lost stories of history, right? And so they can bring to life James A. Garfield and what he did before his presidency. They can bring to life Captain Cook on that ship. They can bring to life the Wager shipwreck and the aftermath of that. And you are in it, you are there. And, ultimately those books usually reveal something about a human truth. We have a few big books in the fall. We have Margaret Atwood's new memoir, Book of Lives, a memoir of sorts, coming in November, which is going to be great fun. And, on the novel front, John Grisham has a new thriller coming out in October. Dan Brown's The Secret of Secrets will be out in September. There's just a wealth of books to choose from, but those are a few things that come to mind.
Now, if I sat somebody in front of you and they said, I'm just a really negative person, Todd, I don't want to read Little Pieces of Hope because it might make me think that life isn't totally terrible. If that poor misguided person was sitting in front of you right now and they said that, what would you say to them?
I would say open up the book at random and read one single page, and I would bet that there is probably one thing that you and I would agree on that could make people happy. It goes a little bit back to what I was saying earlier about that act of noticing things around you, of listening to things around you, the notion of memory, that the memory is this connective tissue that we all have. There's a list in the book that is a Thanksgiving list that is one of my favorite holidays. And I remember writing that list, and one of the things that I'm paraphrasing here, I say something to the effect of all the coats piled on the bed, right? Like you can see that visual, you know what that is. You know exactly the moment when the last relative arrives. You know, there are things that you kind of experience throughout your life that are just these commonalities. And I would bet that if that person opened the book and looked at a single page, they would find something. That's what I would say.
I agree, Todd. I love the book. It certainly put me in a lot better mood. And thank you for being an absolute professional. Please keep replying to my emails.
Will do. Easy to do. And thank you for having me on the show. I appreciate you giving me the time.
And that's it for this episode. Todd, thank you so much for coming on and for everything else, Little Pieces of Hope. Also, don't forget to follow Todd on Instagram. Trust me, it's going to improve your day. I guarantee it. In the meantime, hit us up Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Don't forget the YouTube channel. Until next time, nerds, stay cool.
History